Hi, everybody. My name is Emily. I'm one of the admissions representatives here at Designlab. Thank you so much for joining us today for Changing Lanes, a fireside chat with Designlab mentors who transitioned from other careers. We are joined today by Moamen, Hussein, and Matthew, and they are going to be answering your questions as we go through the presentation today. Before we get started, I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping things to hopefully keep things rolling and make everything a little bit easier. For starters, everyone is absolutely welcome to say hello in the chat. Feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from. I'm sure many of you are coming from different places. So yeah, feel free to introduce yourselves. You can absolutely share LinkedIn information if you want. All the folks in this room are obviously interested in UX and perhaps making a career change in some way. So if you'd like to connect, you absolutely can too. So I'm tuning in from New Jersey today in the US. As we go through the presentation, I'm going to get the ball rolling by presenting some questions for our mentors and participants. We do have a couple questions prepped, but I would definitely encourage everybody to look in the lower right-hand side of your screen, and you'll be able to see that there is a questions tab. If you click into that, you'll be able to ask questions, and we'll go through them and present them to our facilitators today. If you see that someone is asking a question that you're interested in learning more about, please upvote it. Questions with upvotes will be prioritized. Cool. We're just going to take a minute to have our mentors introduce themselves. Hussein, do you want to start? Oh, Hussein, can you hear me? Oh no. Matthew, do you want us to get started and then I'll...
There's some issue with Emily's internet.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. If you need to shut your camera off at any time, if the connection's a little bit fuzzy, it's not a problem at all. Matthew, do you want to get started and just introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I think I might be having some problems too, but I can at least hear everybody. So yeah, so a little bit about me. Feel free to call me Matt. I've been a UX researcher for a little bit over 3 years, and I won't name the boot camp program because I don't want to advertise it, but it's not Designlab. I got through it in late 2019, and then the weird part is all my entire UX experience is pretty much post-COVID and work from home. So I'm happy to talk more about that. But prior to coming into UX research, I was a school teacher, and I also worked at a nonprofit and just did a lot of other odd jobs before finally finding my way to UX.
Thanks so much. That's awesome. I was a school teacher too. Moamen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Maybe I can go next.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead, Hussein. Go for it.
Yeah, hi guys. My name is Hussein. I'm currently a mentor at Designlab as well. Been mentoring with Designlab since 2021. And prior to UX design, I've been doing UX design since 2017. And prior to that, I was a filmmaker, so I was still in the creative field. I was working in consulting and advertising agency. So yeah, I've been doing that since 2013. I did not take any formal route to get to UX design. I'm a self-taught learner, and because of some of the things I learned in filmmaking, I was able to embed those skills into UX. Yeah. I'll bounce it out to the moment. Yeah.
Yep.
Sure, thank you. Hey everyone. So my name is Moamen Kohail, and I am actually a dentist who switched to UX design. So I started working as a UX designer about I'm almost like 5 years now. I've been working as UX designer. So worked with companies here in Egypt. So I'm actually from Egypt, and then as I worked through as I learned more and more, I progressed and then started working remotely with companies outside of Egypt. So in the States, for example, and right now I'm working for a company in Finland. And I didn't also take a formal route to UX design, but I've always been interested in graphic design even before joining dental school. So it was somehow a natural progression, and that's all. Maybe in the questions I'll talk more about the switch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving a little background about yourselves. It's always nice to know, just kind of break the ice a bit. So in terms of a first question, I'd love to learn what motivated you to change careers into UX design, and how did you first get interested in this field? And anyone can feel free to jump in.
I can go, yeah, because for me it's pretty easy. I was unemployed for 2 years prior to getting into UX. So the motivation, to be honest, was I just needed a job, and I was already, I think, I was already in my early 30s. So the cultural demands suggest you really should be making some real money then, unless you're independently wealthy, which I wasn't. I had a very serious relationship as she became my wife. I had a lot to work on, and just other things I was doing wasn't working. I mentioned being a teacher. I was really more emotional burnout there than anything, and wanting to maybe do something which is going to sound funny, a little easier than teaching. There was a friend of mine who I hadn't really spoken to since college, but we kept up through a mutual friend. And she had been a photographer and had trouble finding work there and was really good. But she ended up going into UX design. And she told me about the program she did and that I should do it too. And I was pretty skeptical, but in about 2 hours, she got me to make the initial phone call to them. And then I liked the vibe. So it worked out. And I would say just a little bit about why I went into research too, more so, even though it was like a generalist program. It just fit my background a little bit more because I never really was like a visual. I wasn't as much of a visual creative person. I was more written words and like process oriented. But I also did some social science research that was relevant, that I later learned was relevant to UX. But yeah, it was a lot of the things I'd done in the past kind of helped me. But I'll be honest that I didn't have this like, this whole map in my head about how my previous experience was going to work in UX. I didn't have like a 10-year or even a 5-year plan. I just needed a job. and I heard that, UX was this edgy thing where you could get a job and make good money. So that was pretty much where I was at with the decision.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for providing that context. Teaching is definitely a very hard job for sure. Moamen, do you have anything you want to, or Hussein? I think Hussein's internet is having a little bit of trouble, but do either of you have something that you would like to contribute to this question, or should we jump to the next one?
Yeah, I think my internet is stable now. I had to search.
Amazing.
I could not see anything before that. I think your part was like, I don't know what. Yeah. So anyway, for me, I got into UX because I saw like some tangible impact being made. I love telling stories of people, and that's what I was doing in filmmaking. I loved telling people's narrative, and I thought why not to do something tangible, and that's why I got into UX, because you can see the impact being made from the work you do, from the stories that people tell you, towards translating them into something visual, and so that's why for me, so that's why I switched to UX design. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Cool. Well, let's jump into our next question. So what skills did you bring from your previous career that have helped you in UX design? And what skills did you really have to develop?
So I can start with this one. So interestingly, when I thought about it, how much it's not a stretch to say that there are some common skills in dentistry, dental school, that you learn that are actually quite common with the UX design. It's not a stretch to say that. So one of the a few things that I can think of right now are there are the social skills, how you do, for example, in the research, how you talk to people, how you try to ask them the right questions to get that kind of information. So in dentistry, that was a whole aspect of learning how to diagnose a problem. So that's, in a way, it's actually problem solving. So actually how to diagnose a problem with the patient and so on. And that was a big deal in dental school. And the next thing, what really interested me is the focus on research. So there is a movement in dentistry that's called evidence-based dentistry. So the whole fact, the idea of it is treatment plans or anything that you can do in your practice are based on research. So in essence, also in UX design, your design decisions are based on research findings. So that was really interesting to take all of these skills and actually apply it to an entire new career.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, it's always really interesting to hear how folks take prior skills and apply them to their new position. For sure. There's so much, I think, overlap that people don't even realize. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Would anyone else like to jump in on this one?
I can add on, and I saw somebody's from Maryland. So I went to University of Maryland, so I'll shout out Maryland, and I'm from the state originally, although I live in Virginia now. I was a journalism major. I never worked as a journalist, but one of the skills similar to what Moamen was saying is even as a journalist, but especially as a researcher, you want to ask the right questions. You want to do them in an objective way. I was just talking to a mentee about this 2 days ago. And as a journalism major, that was one of the main things you had to learn was, first asking. One of the things too, I tell a lot of other researchers, not asking too many questions. And as a journalist, you may only get 5 minutes, and you may have to get everything to your from that source for your story. And that they're only giving you 5 minutes because they're busy, or you caught them between like at a coffee break at work on the phone. So you don't have all day to get what you're looking for, and you also don't want to ask them questions that could make them uncomfortable or be offensive or be off topic, because then they'll just brush you off. So asking good questions and just taking a scientific approach, as Moamen also brought up. I didn't have much of that background, though. I would say the other thing that really helped was in the sense of teaching wise and other things I've done is empathy. That's a word that gets used a lot in UX. And I think it's not quite what people think it is. And I can talk more about that later. That I don't think you have to be the most empathetic person in the world to be a good UXer, but it's certainly good to start if you are someone who's working in a context where you're very close to the user, and maybe the user is not someone you normally identify with, that you're comfortable with it. To start with empathy. It usually makes you a better UXer, but I would say it's not the end all be all. And certainly as a teacher, you can't possibly be a good classroom teacher without empathy. I would say it'd be almost impossible. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime that you're working with people, it's such an important quality and trait to have as far as how you approach your work, regardless of what it might be. Cool. So we have a question from Brian that's been upvoted quite a number of times. In a competitive UX job market, how does someone transitioning from a different career stand out to recruiters and employers? Do you all have any thoughts or insights into that?
Yeah, maybe I can take this one. So for me, I'm originally from Pakistan, and I took an internship in Hong Kong. And when I was applying for full-time roles for UX, I did not know anybody in Hong Kong, right? Literally nobody except for the people I was working with. So for me, it was very challenging. What did work out for me is to do more and more networking. So when I say networking, it's an overused term throughout, not just UX roles, but other roles as well. Being more participative and being more present is something that is more relevant. So I started going for different kind of events in the creative industry, made some connections, not just with UX designers, but also people working across different disciplines, because yes, UX designers can be in the hiring role, but some business people can also be in the hiring role as well. So I started making those connections and those network around me. Plus you yourself are your own advocate. So nobody's going to do the job for you. You have to advocate for yourself. So if you know some skill, you need to share that. Like how people say show and tell, right? That's what you have to do. That could be done at different events like hackathons and stuff like that. But also helping out somebody, right? In some role. So I joined this community here called Creative Mornings. It's a global community, it's everywhere around the world. I started volunteering with different people for different pro bono projects. Sometimes they were like commission projects as well. So that's where like my skills were mostly used. So nobody's like testing you out, but like you're actually like taking up like some real world projects, like getting yourself out there, making yourself more present, and yeah, that's how I did it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say this is a tough one for me. I don't think I'm particularly good at marketing myself. I'm sort of ideologically opposed to it in a lot of ways, but it's something you just have to do, even if it's just via LinkedIn in today's, was like what was said about how competitive the job market is. I will say one thing I keep hearing again and again, or it's implicit in job descriptions, even if you don't hear it from, hiring managers directly, is just finding a way to, and it was alluded to before, like showing the business value or the metrics of success as it relates to your work. And you don't want to just, show them pretty pictures and say how much fun you had on a project. You want to specifically tie your work to a business goal and maybe use terms that are not design oriented, more business oriented. And I think that's going to make a huge difference, especially in the earlier rounds, or all the rounds of the interview process. And that's not easy to do. I mean, I can go beyond that, but you may have had previous UX roles where the organization didn't have the maturity to kind of give you the data to say how effective your work is. So there's a lot of work within just that you have to do to kind of meet those gaps sometimes in order to get that next job. And if you're just starting out, yeah, it's even harder.
So if I can add to what Matthew has said, I'm how it worked for me was I would recommend that you find your own voice as a UX designer, your own brand. And like Matthew has said, like having some sort of a business insight would make you stand out. Having some sort of a, let's say, marketing insight will make you stand out. So it's not necessarily just being another UX designer, but more of a, you have more insight into something in specific that a business would look into your profile, would look into your resume, and then think that you have this extra thing that makes you different from other UX designers. So it's just finding the thing that you already have some knowledge of it and adding it to the UX design knowledge and experience you could obtain.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Those were all really great responses. So we're going to shift just a little bit. How do you feel about switching jobs right now with the current economy and starting a new career path? What are some possible pros and cons?
I think because I'm based in Asia, so things are a little bit different compared to the North America market. But definitely, I would say, yeah, for sure, you can be a risk taker, but at the same time, you need to calculate how much risk you can take, right? Like, you can't just like make an impulsive decision about it. You need to see like what I would have done, like, I've never switched a job without securing another job. So for me, that's how it has been. But I would say, like, you need to see what exactly is going on in the market. You need to evaluate it. You need to keep an eye out there. And the way how you can do it is talking to more and more people, right? Like making connections and network around people, like, who are working in the industry, understanding the real dynamics of the industry, and like, considering, like, recently there has been like a lot of like tech layoffs around UX industry, but at the same time, like, it has opened doors for many opportunities as well, right? Like, a lot of, like, I saw one of the questions was regarding AI and stuff like that, and like a lot of times we ask this question, that is AI, like, consuming all of our jobs? But I think, like, when one door closes, the other door opens as well. So at the same time, like, I would say, while you're securing something new, make sure that you're not completely leaving the boat that you're in. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Does anybody else want to hop in on that one, or should I move on to the next question?
So this if I can also add to what Hussein has said, this also reminds me how when I switched careers, it has never been something that I woke up and said, you know what, I would be doing this entirely. This is my the only thing I would be doing. It was more of like before. I think at some point during COVID, where I've decided that I was actually going to my practice until COVID, until 2019 something. And at some point, I was pouring so much work into UX and less work in my practice. And it made sense at some point to start focusing more and more on that. But it was never an aspect where you said, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm doing that. It's just because you got to have a more careful approach to it.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you're passionate about something, of course you want to go for it, but you also want to make sure that you're doing it at the right time and it makes sense for you and your own career path and journey. Absolutely. So sort of in line with that, how can you tailor your resume in order to stand out if you don't have previous design experience when looking for jobs?
Maybe I can take this one. In my UX role, right, before actually getting into UX role, I did more managerial stuff in the agency where I was working in creative projects, but I was doing video production and stuff like that. So I was able to put a metrics to it, what impact did my work create. And I think if you can calculate or what kind of impact you're creating, that's how you can position yourself. So I was more or less talking about the value I was bringing to each of my roles. So even though they were not related directly to UX, but what value do I bring to the team, and how do I help the business grow? So yeah, that's how I was doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a similar to what Hussein said, that there's another way of putting that word, the XYZ method, if you Google that for the resume. And we talked about it, but just not just listing your responsibilities, but your impact. And there are other jobs that, like marketing, that are somewhat tangential, that you may have built some skills, or even customer service that you could translate into UX. I don't know how effective it is sometimes, because there's just not a lot of entry level positions. It seems like, at least I'm not seeing that many. So it's almost like you have to tailor it as if you're not entry level. So that would be one kind of vague suggestion, but there are mentors that will help you with this. I mean, I've helped a lot of people with this. I think that the short answer is just get help from somebody who's more senior, who has transitioned from another field, and see what they did. Get them to really pour through your resume. Don't be shy about it at all. I have mentors that'll cut the whole resume apart and make it, cut out all the academic language and things like that is not as friendly in the tech field. But then I think the other thing I heard that's important, and I don't always do this, but is to just kind of have a personal touch on your resume. Not a lot, but something to show that you're human. You're not just a robot. I personally don't like those mission statements that look like you could have just pulled it from the internet. So I think if you're going to have one of those, really make it personal. And then, of course, as a researcher, the portfolio is not quite as important, but I know as a designer that could be more important than the resume, I think, in a lot of cases. For a researcher, it's about 50-50 whether they even want one at all. So it's a little different.
Cool. Thanks so much. Yeah, definitely a lot of good tips and insight. So in terms of your sort of career journey, how long did it take you to find a job once you finished your boot camp or education process?
Well, for me, I remember, it was so I graduated in November 2019, and I started my first UX job in February. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and everything shut down. So it was about 3 months. Which wasn't bad at all, given that I was unemployed for so long before that. So, but I don't want to make it sound like it's easy either, because I have had 2 jobs subsequently, so it's not like I've just had a smooth employment ever since. So I would give yourself at least 6 months to be realistic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So as a person stepping into the UX industry with really no experience, what are some really important things to learn in terms of developing technologies? And do you have any tips for how to use extra time that you might have while trying to transition into this field?
If I can take this one, so one of the things that I struggled with when I started the switch to UX design is I learned so much by just tinkering around with different softwares with different designs because I used to do graphic design. So one of the problems is not having the industry terminology and terms. Even if you do things, you still need to know the exact process and how things are done in the field. And I see this is the one thing that I feel like it developed so much recently with Designlab Academy and so on, where you can find boot camps, you can find courses that are so comprehensive in the way that you can fill in the gaps that you might see if you try to learn UX through different sources. So it's a lot better than before. 5 years ago, there wasn't this much comprehensive knowledge in one place. So when it comes to important things, I feel like it's important that you there are no specifics based on my experience, but more of you have to look into this in a basically not just focus on learning the technical things, like learning how to design and so on. You have to find something more comprehensive, and then it would be easy enough to get to know the major things that you need. Hopefully this answered questions. Feel like this and as for the extra time best used while trying to transition while still working in other fields, I would say you just have to keep up with everything related to the X design industry when it comes like blogs, books, and so on. I know the answer is a bit broad, but the extra time is best used for that. One of the things that really benefited me, and I remember that I was somehow obsessed. I'm not sure if I say the exact source, but I was a bit obsessed with the Smashing Magazine blog. So that Smashing Magazine blog was a really nice source that I kept checking every day because back then it was somehow a good source for. That was a while ago. It's not really a new thing, and so I would say the most obvious answer: reading from different sources, whether it blogs from different designers, from different experts, and so on.
Awesome. Thank you.
For me, it was more about surrounding yourself with like the right people to learn from. So the way how I learned with the new upcoming or like trending technology is by surrounding myself with people who are in that space, in the tech space. So for example, when we talk about like Web3, when we talk about like generative AI and things like that, I like to surround myself with such kind of people, whether in the physical space or in the online space. That's how I'm keeping up with technology and like learning about it and practicing and like whenever I get time. Regarding like how to best utilize your time, like whenever you get like extra time. For me, like it is an opportunity cost, right? Like you can spend your time like doing some random stuff. You can spend your time like doing something more productive. For me, like it is an opportunity cost, and I like to read, but I also like to listen on the go, like podcasts and things like that. So I always recommend my students to like listen to different kind of podcasts where you can keep up with the industry, plus like what's going on, market trends and things like that. So I think that like, all of us know whenever we are commuting and things like that. So I think that would be the best way to go about it. And what other way to best utilize your extra time is being more collaborative with other people. So in many cities around the world, Figma has like Friends of Figma communities and things like that. There are many other communities like that too. And all those communities, like, have like those co-working sessions and like, like design jams and things like that. So I like to spend my time with that. Like, for me, like I spend more time co-working while reviewing Designlab students' work. But yeah, like, that's how I would say, like, I utilize my time.
Yeah, one thing about UX is there's just a ton of information out there. I mean, there's Discord channels, Slack channels, email lists. Yeah, plenty of podcasts. Somebody asked for a recommendation of maybe, I think it's Awkward UX, the one I kind of listen to more than others. I don't know. I don't know if there's that many great ones because I love podcasts, but there's definitely a lot of them. And so it kind of, I guess it depends on what type you're in, what your specialty is as well. I did want to make one other comment about, I think I'm kind of answering the question, but for me, it wasn't even just learning tools and applications, and certainly collaboration and soft skills was good, but it was just the domain knowledge of the area that I was in. Because if you work in an enterprise UX context, somebody mentioned they work in healthcare, that's great, because sometimes you need the domain knowledge more than you need skill building in UX, because like the product I work on is insanely complicated. You could be the best researcher in the world coming in, it'd still take you months to learn the product. So keep that in mind, because it's it's something I have no background in, which is financial stuff and investing. And so if you're coming into something blind, but you have the UX skills, you still have to learn the domain if you don't know it already. So keep that in mind. And also it's helpful if you do have that knowledge in the background. So in your background, I should say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. That was really comprehensive. So what were some differences between your expectations versus the reality when you started your first UX UI design role?
Oh, that's a great question. Sorry, I just jump in on this one. I answer this one even when people don't ask, but because I feel free to totally disagree with me. The other panelists, I will say, I don't want to sound too cynical, but I would say the edginess and excitement in my boot camp was like off the charts. I mean, I was almost like, oh my God, I'm entering Disneyland. The reality was, I would say, below even average level of excitement. I mean, it was not even like, one of my mentors will say, when people come in and they're all excited about research in particular, I think there's a lot more people excited about design than they are about research. I would dare anybody to challenge me. I mean, overall, there's not as many people interested in research, but just speaking to the research aspect, one of my mentors, my favorite one, will say, like, don't get too excited. You're going to spend half your day in meetings. And that is the reality for me in some days. I mean, or some weeks, I should say. It's not as much creativity the way you might think about it, as you think it's going to be really creative, but it might really just be about, you have this great idea of what you want to design differently, and then the PO says, okay, strip that down to 20% because we don't have the budget and the time, and then you're just thinking on your feet and you're frustrated, and you deliver something you don't really like, but maybe they're really happy, so you pat yourself on the back. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of constraints, at least in enterprise, my area. I mean, in others, maybe there isn't. But just to be honest with you, that it's not nearly as exciting or creative as I would have expected coming out of boot camp.
Yeah. So if I can also add on that, so this is also something I felt like, if you could, we usually dwell so much into the design aspect when we working as a generalist. The design aspect is fun, but then you're hit by the reality of limits. And I think this is the sort of thing that could be useful for someone who wish to improve more in terms of businesses hiring you, is being a predictable, a reliable UX designer. So there is a thing where you can do a great design, and then it's not easily implementable, or it's this just tiny thing that literally could mean a lot more resources, a lot more budget to it, server costs, and so on. So being understanding this is, and being okay with the, like Matthew has said, the compromises. Like your design is going to be absolutely minimized at some point, and you would try to be as much as possible flexible enough to get the best version out of this sort of compromise. Understand what to compromise and what not, and also that you wouldn't always have the luxury to do things in the not necessarily in the best way, but to do the exact process that you are used to. So they're not always this kind of luxury. So you try as much as possible to get the best result with the somehow limited resources. And the fun of seeing something as you have exactly imagined is really good. But if you're imagining something but it can't be implemented, then it's not much of a solution to the problem, basically.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I think we probably have time for one more question. I want to be mindful of time for everybody, but Molly's asked, did you ever worry that UX wasn't going to be the right field for you, or that you wouldn't be able to succeed in this new arena? I think this is a normal part of any change, but wondering if anyone has tips for keeping your head up.
I think like
yeah,
this
that's just
happened to
another.
me.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Hussein.
Yeah, this happened to me in my very first job, right? Like, I rarely talk about this, but it's been recorded. So yeah, like for me, like it happened in my very first job when probably like 2 months into my job, and I was told by my product manager that you should not continue with the UX role. Like, you're not made for this. And I started having like self-doubt, like, if this is actually the thing for me. Like, I took like 1 week of annual leave to think about where am I going in my career. But yeah, like, but I think like I was not my product manager, but my line manager. I think he was a really inspiring and motivating person who did bring me back. Like, so I think for me, like, I did had doubts in my very first job, but like, given the opportunities I was presented with, I think I was able to learn, improve, and prove myself at the same time. So yeah, like, it's never a linear path, right? Like, it's never like sunshine and rainbows, and like, you start with a job and it stays awesome like that, right? Like, you will definitely face challenges. You might be like put down by other people, but you yourself can, like, make yourself better, and you know yourself better than anyone else. So I think you should see why you first got into this field. Why did you transition, or like, took this field in the first place? What is it that you care for, right? Like, and what is your ultimate goal that you want to achieve? And I think that will help you realize, like, if this is the right field for you or not.
So if I can also answer this one, because I'm so familiar. Somebody asked about imposter syndrome, and this is related. And so one of the things I struggled with is there is always this inner critic saying that you're not good enough. And if somebody to criticize me, I would say, you haven't heard my what my inner critic is saying. So it's usually that what really helped me, I think, trying to control this sort of thoughts was doing things. And in essence, you're just thinking, maybe I'm terrible at this, but I'm still learning. I'm looking into improving. So it's perfectly fine if you enjoy something and you feel like this is the right thing for you, even if you're terrible at it, and you're telling yourself you're terrible at it, at least you're doing something about it. So whenever you feel like you are terrible at doing this, just try your best into doing more, maybe do something more designs, learn more, and so on. I'm sure keeping your mind busy with these sort of things you won't have time really to think about how terrible you are anyway. So that's my approach usually.
Yeah, I think they both said it so well. I appreciate the vulnerability as well as the folks listening in. I think it's going to happen to everybody, no matter how skilled you are. I also think the element of, since all my jobs have been remote, you don't get as much validation. You know how I'm more of an extroverted person. If you're around the water cooler, somebody's like, oh, hey, I really love what you contributed to that meeting the other day. You don't get as much of that in a remote setting. And you can sometimes feel like you're not even like there, like you're in the meeting and nobody, they're having a conversation and they don't even ask you. You try to jump in and they don't notice and they just keep going. You're like, oh, why am I even here? And so you'll feel that way a lot if you're anything like me, just because of the remote setting. But I feel like, like having good management always helps to kind of pick you up when you're a little down, or just, I would say just having a good team will really make up for any deficiencies in your own skill set, because then they'll be more willing to help you through it, or forgive you if you have a terrible week and something goes wrong. So I think for me, that's really what keeps me going, is my immediate team are just really great, really competent people. So if you're lucky enough to find that, I would stay with them as long as you can.
All really great answers and advice. Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's always really nice to hear those stories, because it's motivating and inspiring, and I think just helps kind of stay on track when maybe you're feeling like it's a little bit of a hard journey, which everyone will at some point. So we only have about 3.5 minutes left. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to wrap up. First and foremost, if anybody would like to connect with our fabulous presenters here, you'll be able to do so on this slide that's loading. You can connect on LinkedIn. And then if you're interested in learning with us here at Designlab, we have a ton of different ways to get in touch. I'm going to share our admissions email address. As a reminder, I'm on the admissions team, so you may be talking to myself or one of my fabulous colleagues. You can also definitely feel free to book in a call with us if you'd like to discuss anything about next steps in terms of moving forward with Designlab, or even just chatting through, questions about the UX UI design space and what that might look like. If you're interested in participating in some more of our events that we're hosting this month, we're going to be running Q&As and panels all month. You can check that out here at our Design Your Future in UX link. It'll have everything listed out that you can participate in. And here is our Designlab homepage. For anyone who would like to get a bit more information about the program, you can definitely do so here. And also our foundations homepage, where you can learn a little bit more about the prerequisite course and taking a first step into moving forward with UX, and how to do that at Designlab if you're interested. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. We are always super happy to connect with you. We love chatting with students and just helping kind of guide you along the next steps towards hopefully making the leap into UX UI. Thank you so much again to Hussein, Moamen, and Matthew. You guys were awesome, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come out today. I know I speak for everyone when I say this was a really phenomenal panel, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.